What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and as promised, this is my review of the Legend of Vox Machina, the Critical Role animated series. Before we can talk about the animated series, though, there's some things you need to know, framing it all out ahead of time. One of those is that I don't review TV or movies as part of what I do here on YouTube, so I'm not going to approach it from that perspective, but I am going to talk about it as someone who's a fan of D&D and a fan of Critical Role. To that point, am I a fan of Critical Role? Yes, I would consider myself a casual fan, though I have a larger connection to Vox Machina and Campaign 1, as I did start watching live around episode 19 or 20, and continued that through the entirety of the campaign, even attended the first live show at Gen Con. So I am a fan. I've watched the other stuff, but I have a bigger connection to this original character, so I'm biased towards them. Back to Kickstarter, I was excited to have this happen. So, that being said, I'm a fan of animation. Look around the room. I'm a huge nerd. Yes, is the long story short. Everything from classical stuff like Hanna-Barbera and Thundercats, Ninja Turtles like I used to grow up watching, to Japanese anime, adult animation like Futurama, things of that nature. Whatever. I like animation, so it's not like I'm going to bias, be like, it's a cartoon, it sucks, I hate it. A couple of things you also need to understand from the perspective of this being a D&D based show. Here's the thing, it's not referenced anywhere in the promotional material or otherwise that this is a Dungeons & Dragons based show because it is not sanctioned by Wizards of the Coast. It is put on by Critical Role and Amazon and the animation team that helped make it, not Dungeons & Dragons. As such, you'll notice changes have to happen to make that a possibility. The biggest example being Scalen's #1 move is Bigby's Hand, right? Bigby is an intellectual property or IP owned by Wizards of the Coast. To get around that, he says Scanlan's Hand when he casts the spell, and that fixes that problem as far as open game licenses and things you're allowed to say and not. There are other instances of that as we move through the campaign, and I will do my best to highlight those where I think that it's important. Otherwise, I'll just move past it. Another thing to consider is, again, I'll address it as we get into it, but this was originally a Kickstarter. I think everybody is aware of that, but the Kickstarter raised a ridiculous amount, $10, $11 million, but its original purpose was to only make 2 episodes to tell a story of Vox Machina at level 7 before they started streaming. To give you a little frame of reference, Campaign 1 it started off as a home game with all of the characters and the players involved, as a home game that they would play whenever they could. Birthday parties, things of that nature, whenever they got around to it. And it was also in Pathfinder. Geek and Sundry at the time approached them and said, hey, we'd love to have you live stream your campaign, and we'd like you to switch over to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. What do you think? They said yes. The rest is history. So the purpose of this was to originally tell the legend of Vox Machina, to tell this story, this 22-minute or so episodes that were going to tell the story about what happened before the stream started. Now, we had a little bit of information on this in the character's backstory from a pre-roll video that would play before every episode of Campaign 1, that each character would have about 2.5 minutes to give everybody the backstory on their character, again, outlining stuff that was discussed in their home campaign before the game actually went live and streamed on the internet. This was to, again, frame that out. So you might see things that you don't remember happening because you never actually saw them. They were told ahead of time. And to that nature of it being changed and different, you're also going to see creative liberties taken with the way certain abilities and spells work because it just doesn't make good television, right? And I'll talk about those. There's a couple of really specific instances I can talk about, but you need to think about that they need to make a good and entertaining show for people who maybe aren't, there's a lot of Easter eggs and things specifically for fans of Critical Role and fans of Dungeons & Dragons, but this also needs to work as a standalone show for people who don't know anything about Critical Role or know anything about Dungeons & Dragons, so that this can be something that lives on Amazon and does well without that. Now, I know that fan base is massive, so it almost doesn't matter in that aspect, but from a business standpoint, you want to make it a good animated series that anybody can enjoy, regardless of their knowledge of Critical Role or Dungeons & Dragons. And I do think they've obviously achieved that. If we were to go look at it on Amazon Prime, you can see right here it is #3 in the United States of everything. It's not the #3 in animation. It's the #3 thing being watched on Amazon. And it has only been out for a month, right? And it just ended a couple days ago. As I said, I don't know if I said it already, but there are 12 episodes. They are roughly 25 minutes apiece. You can see it has 3,600 reviews, 5 stars here on Amazon, 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb. Also, something I thought that was unique is it has its own merch store on Amazon. I don't know if this is a standard thing that Amazon does, but you can see you can buy shirts, sweatshirts, even action figures. And if you scroll down, it says, check back for more merch coming soon. When this first launched, they only had the Vex action figure here, and then they shortly after added the Percy action figure. So I imagine over time, we will get additional action figures for the remainder of the cast. And then again, I wanted to show this briefly. Here's the Kickstarter showing that the original plan was to fund this level 7 adventure for 2 episodes, and then it actually spun out into not just 8 more episodes, but 10 more episodes to cover the Briarwood arc, which is one of the more popular arcs of Campaign 1. Speaking of, you can see it right here as those episode 24 to 38, so these 14 episodes of Campaign 1 comprise the Briarwood arc. That is roughly averaging things out at about 4 hours or so, roughly 2,500 minutes of campaign time. To give you a frame of reference, the 10 episodes is about 250 minutes. So the animated series is 10 times less the amount of footage and runtime as the original campaign had for this. But I think that having all of this, and I can just click these links to go to the VODs of those videos, is a benefit to the writers who wrote this story, because you have all of this content as it played out. You can look at what fans interacted with and liked the most, and then use that as your basis for when you start to write this story. Cut the fat where you can and touch on the major key points. And I think that that is also why a lot of folks have said they enjoy the latter 10 episodes of Critical Role, Legends of Vox Machina, versus the original 2, which were, again, taking multiple home games episodes and things and stringing those all together to make 2 22, 25-minute episodes, is very different than pulling from 14 episodes where you can watch everything and all the interactions happen live and take the important parts and make that happen. So I think that's why a lot of people, even my wife who watched it with me, said that the first 2 episodes felt very different in tone and more disjointed than the latter 10, which seems like a continuous story. That's because it was based off of those original episodes. So consider that if you got burnt out and didn't enjoy the first 2 episodes of Critical Role, Legends of Vox Machina, I'd say at least try the 3rd and 4th episode, and then if you like it, then continue on, because it does get, I think, significantly more interesting. So I think that covers all of our intro bits. I will say that it is a 16 plus, and some episodes are rated 18 plus for various reasons. Consider that. There is some times where the gore, the cartoon kind of gore, is a little, I won't call it extreme, but it's intense. So that could possibly be a turnoff for some folks. But I do think, as a fan of Dungeons and Dragons and a fan of Critical Role, it's a very well done series. Like I said, I love the animation. And I really like they peppered it with Easter eggs for D&D fans and Critical Role fans. Not just fans of Campaign 1, but fans of subsequent campaigns as well. There's little things here and there that you can pull from. And I enjoy that. And it's also fun, again, as a D&D player, to try and see what the different abilities are that the characters are using. Because a lot of the times, with the exception of things like Scanlan's Hand, which is obviously very obvious what it is, trying to pinpoint what was that spell, what was this, is a fun little adventure you can kind of go on and try to figure that out. But it also might help you from a D&D campaign perspective to better explain your attacks and your abilities. If you're using something similar in your game, maybe you can use the animated series as an example for how your certain spell cast would look, which I thought also really cool. Visual aids definitely help. So let's dive into the series itself. Again, we're talking about the first 2 episodes, the Terror of Tal'Dorei Part 1 and 2. But before we do that, I wanted to give you an ample spoiler warning, first of all. So if you have not watched Legends of Vox Machina, please click away, go watch the series, and then come back and finish the review, because this will be filled with spoilers. So you have been subsequently warned. Continue at your own risk. The other thing is, if it comes up, I will use the term show to denote anything talking about the animated series Legends of Vox Machina. I will refer to it as in the show. And I will refer to anything referring to the campaign actual play as the campaign, right? So that gives you a reference if I'm talking about the show or the campaign, because there's instances that are different that I want to talk about. So Rolling into the Terror of Tal'Dorei Part 1 and 2, the original plan for the Kickstarter, this is basically our establishing heroes episodes. Because all of this stuff, again, when we started watching the series, the campaign live, the characters of Vox Machina was already an established group. They were known, they had a keep, they had a base, they had all of this stuff going for them. And we didn't get to see that. We were kind of we took it at face value and went with it. This is sort of establishing that, and that was the purpose, again, of the Kickstarter. So we have a lot of intricate things where the party starts off with a bar fight, a good classic D&D thing. And then the party has a moment where they're like, why are we even together? And I appreciate that. That's something you definitely see I feel like in a lot of campaigns. Where, some of the party might consider, why are we even working together? You're out for yourself, you're out for this, I'm out for that. Why are we even adventuring? And it's addressed. And I also like it because the way they wrote this, they give them a reason to be a party and a sort of a goal to drive towards throughout these first 2 episodes. And it does a very good job of pushing the story forward and making us believe that the party would come together and want to be a group and work together. And I like that. They decide they're going to basically hunt monsters and take on a mercenary contract from the government to go deal with some monster. But one thing that I thought was interesting is Vex, the ranger, has like a little ringing in her ears or a pinging, and she seems like she has a headache when they're in the council room. We don't know what that is. Later on, they go out, they talk to some townspeople. Importantly, they meet like a nice family in a town, and that plays into it later. And then they go to try to find whatever this monster is and kill it. And turns out it's a blue dragon. Now, it doesn't look like a traditional blue dragon, as I had mentioned earlier, because that iconic image of a blue dragon with the central nose horn stuff is tied to Dungeons & Dragons. It is still a blue dragon. It does still breathe lightning and all of that, but it just looks more generic, if you will. Long story short, the party gets their ass handed to them hard. And I think that's also good, because this is sort of our introduction to these characters, and they're supposed to be heroes, and they lose out the gate, which is a good defining moment for the party. Grog, the barbarian, gets knocked out right out the gate, and I thought that was like a funny haha moment here, but it happens again later on in one of the other major fights that they have later on in the series, and I know 2 things don't make a trope, but it felt like we would be significantly better were the barbarian in here fighting, but we can have better character moments if the barbarian is not present, so knock him out. So that kind of bugged me a little bit. But basically, they also deal a lot with Keyleth being this sort of very powerful druid, but being insecure in her abilities. And they kind of touch on that where she's sort of shell-shocked, someone who's a fan of nature, seeing the apex predator of nature coming down on them. And basically, a bunch of rocks are going to fall on them from the dragon's breath weapon, and she essentially covers like a wall of thorns over top of them to prevent them from being damaged. And again, that's really cool, and I really enjoyed that. It obviously is not how the spells work. You couldn't do that with a wall of thorns spell in the game, but I actually think that could lead to something interesting, right? You could use that. Maybe a magic item or a feat or something to allow you to maybe cast that as a reactionary spell to lessen your damage, provide cover. Or you could use it as a way to thematically adjust your shield spell that you cast if you have access to it to be nature-based rather than just an arcane shimmer, But I forgot to mention that before, when the dragon first showed up, Vex had that ping in her head again. And this is actually the ranger's primeval awareness ability, where, usually the way it works is the ranger chooses to utilize it and it tells them the presence of one of their favorite enemies. And I kind of like this better, where it was sort of just like it happened. And I think that definitely adds a lot more tension to it, and it works again for better television, because she's like, oh, something's going on, what is this? And then it's revealed that the first time she felt this was when a dragon attacked her hometown when she was younger. So, it kind of is setting all of this stuff up, and I really appreciate and like that. And I would wonder if it'd be worth changing primeval awareness to some sort of be like a ping that happens regardless of whether you want it to or not, because that could definitely add tension to your games. They go back to that town that they visited, and unfortunately the town has been decimated by the dragon, and the children that they met, unfortunately, one of them fell, the other one is clinging to life, and they have Pike the cleric come in to try to do it. But to my point earlier about having to change things for television, she had healed somebody in the fight, and she said, I'm too weak come on, let me summon the divine magic, and I'm too weak from healing someone before. I don't have enough power to heal them now, and unfortunately, that kid passes. And as such, that is the character's party-defining moment that they said, we're going to kill this dragon. We're gonna give vengeance for this town, this family, and specifically these children. And that was, again, if you could do that in every campaign, find a way to bring your party together over some common enemy like that, that's a great defining moment. Again, easier to do when you're telling a story. But I also, again, wanted to touch on the healing bit, because realistically, Pike probably still had healing spell slots left for healing. So probably did Vex, the druid, or the ranger. She probably had healing spells left. And Keyleth, the druid, also probably had healing spells. And Scanlan, the bard, also had healing spells. They all could have healed this kid. I mean, at the very least, Pike probably had Spare the Dying, the cantrip, could have done it. But that is Dungeons & Dragons, the game, and works okay in an actual play campaign, but doesn't translate well, and it doesn't make impactful, tension-building television. So that's the kind of changes and things you're going to have. Just like you can't have Wall of Thorns be a shield. You can't, you would have had probably flush with healing magic or potions or something. So anyway, the party coming back defeated decides, tells everybody what's going on, and basically is trying to track down. She gets the ping again in the throne room of the council, thinks it's going to be one of the people maybe had interactions with the dragon. And then again, obviously, if you know what's going on, you kind of can figure this out a little bit. But the party eventually tracks it down to the general's home, where they eventually find out, with the nice Tiamat illusions and stuff on the floor, that General Krieg is actually a blue dragon. He's the one that's been causing all the problems. And they realize that they're in his lair. The party comes together and realizes, we need to do what we do best, be Vox Machina, and we'll beat him. And as such, they do. They use illusion magic. We get to see, some information recalls. We get to see Keyleth using Wall of Thorns to hold a wing down. Percy makes some shots. And Grog does his signature, I would like to rage, and he brings down his axe and kills the dragon. This also leads to them getting a bunch of money, and the thing actually collapses as they're leaving, so they're not able to harvest all of the gold, which doesn't happen in the original thing, because they do eventually make their way back to this estate at a point in the actual campaign to harvest more gold, and then it eventually collapses, but the story serves the same. So that is, again, the first 2 episodes pretty much in a nutshell. They do also get a keep as for surviving and killing the dragon. They're given a keep, a home base location in the city of Amman, which is where they spend a lot of the time and had through the majority of the campaign. But this is where again, where a lot of the set points or pieces will be. So that covers our first 2 episodes, the original purpose of the Kickstarter. And then now the next 10, I'm going to kind of all lump together, but it is the Briarwood arc. Now, as I said, this was one of my favorite arcs to witness live. I had a lot of fun watching it. I still remember a lot of the situations vividly, but that's the other thing. I didn't go back and rewatch Critical Role in preparation for this. I have my memories from, 7 years ago at this point, 7 years ago of watching this live. And I remember a lot of the major set points, but I didn't want to go back and watch it. I remembered some of it that I could, and I wanted to kind of come in as fresh as I could to this, but I knew certain things were coming and certain reveals were going to happen, and I was excited to see that. And I thought that was pretty good. Now, I might go back and touch on a couple episodes later to catch up and see what was adjusted and what was missed, but I very much enjoyed it. I haven't talked too much about the show overall, but I do think, like I said, the first 2 episodes feel a little disjointed. I do appreciate the shorter runtime of the 24 to 28 minute runtime for the various episodes, because you don't have a lot of time in each episode, which I think works to the show's advantage. If this was a 40-minute, each episode was 40 minutes long, we'd have the opportunity to have a lot of slow points. And I think it works well as an animated series, because it's a lot of, you are moving. The pacing is very on point, especially again in the latter episodes. You don't have a lot of wasted time and dialogue. And part of that, I think, too, is you're also working on this budget, right? You have the Amazon money now, sure, but you're pumping out the best content. And it is, you don't go very long before they get into a scrap and get to show off their different abilities and things like that. And I think that works well. We get to see all of the characters shine in their different moments while still having enough time to develop characters, learn a little bit of backstory. And I think it's done very well. And like I said, the animation style is on point. So it starts with the party going to a dinner party. Percy's in his glory because he used to be a noble and he's all about high society. And it also works as well as a social encounter for Dungeons and Dragons. Like the party's trying to navigate social fineries. They have to check their weapons at the door so they don't have access to any of their gear. And it's very shortly after that the Briarwoods are introduced, Delilah and Silas Briarwood. Percy immediately is on edge. He even goes to reach for his gun, which is a nice little like animation thing that doesn't he doesn't have it because he checked it. And we kind of learn a little bit that they murdered his whole family. And that's the reason why he's here and not ruling his, ancestral home of Whitestone. We don't get too much more that gets revealed over the next few episodes, but Vax the rogue decides to sneak off and try to gather information. They've stayed in Whitestone for so long. Why are they out now? What's going on? He gets to use his belt, Simon, which is his belt can come off and turn into a snake. And I really like the little nod to Metal Gear Solid where they give the snake an eye patch. I thought that was a kind of a nice little touch. And they also talk about their signal word. Like, what do we do? If something bad happens, say this and we'll all know it's go time. In the original campaign, that was Jenga, like the block pulling game. They said Chenga, and I really appreciate like they tried to keep it as authentic as they could without having to pay royalty licenses to whoever owns Jenga. And I like that. Basically, Vax gets caught by Silas and Delilah. It's revealed that Delilah has magic and that Silas is a vampire. And they get into a major fight out in the courtyard. And we learn, Delilah strikes Pike and seems to crack our holy symbol, so she's having a crisis of faith. And we see Percy start to have foreshadowing of this sort of roiling smoke that's coming out of him when he's puts on his Plague Doctor mask and is kind of in vengeance mode, if you will. But I really like, obviously it's touching heavily on Percy's backstory. I think it's a really good job of building up this character and giving ample screen time to a character who needs it to tell their backstory. And then you can focus on other characters in later episodes and arcs, which I thought was very well done. And I also really like this they've instilled this crisis of faith in Pike, the cleric, right? Where she has her holy symbol cracked. She thinks it's a sign. The party is basically put under house arrest, and they're assaulted by basically either I think they're either supposed to be wraiths or ghosts. And obviously the person you'd want to have at full strength would be your cleric, who can't seem to summon any of her divine power. But basically, yeah, they learn a little bit more about Percy's dark backstory, about how he ran away. Him and his sister tried to escape. His sister was felled by arrows, and he escaped by himself. I don't know if it's at this point that we start to learn about how he basically made his gun. He has a gun called the Pepper Box, which is a 6-barreled gun that has the names of each of the people that like caused him and his family harm on each of the barrels, right? Silas Briarwood, Delilah Briarwood, so on each of the barrels, which is a really cool thematic thing. I really enjoyed that. And that's played up very well. We can see kind of like a light and fire whenever he's in the presence of one of them. I thought that was really neat. But basically, the party barely survives as they manage to fight off these things. It's pretty gruesome. They're like oozing black gunk from their eyes and their mouth when these things like try to like basically possess them. But it essentially leads to the party deciding, hey, Percy, we're going to go help you take back your ancestral home of Whitestone. You told us what happened. We're on here. We're your party. We're your team. Let's go do it. And they're reading through in the process of this the book that Vax stole from the chest. And they see a couple of things. They, again, continue to reference the Whispered One, which is very important for the overall campaign, but also specifically this arc. They see some like very Necronomicon-esque ritualistic stuff, as well as a ziggurat. And essentially on the road, they get assaulted. They're in a carriage. They get assaulted by creatures trying to steal the book back. And I love this sequence, this whole like wagon chase scene going off of cliffs and stuff. It's very well done. I very much enjoy that. I thought that was a very nicely done scene. And I don't recall this happening in the campaign. It might have, but either way, it serves a purpose to get them to Whitestone. And I really appreciated that. We then move into them being in Whitestone. They see that it's, Percy's trying to tell them all about how great his town, the big sun tree blooming and all this and that, all this wonderful things about Whitestone. And it's essentially in a perpetual gray fog. The sun tree is dying. There are undead giants patrolling the streets. It's just like awful. And he's distraught. His hometown and his homeland is just a wreck. Then they're trying to find out if there's any people still loyal to him and his family, the Dorolos. And they go seeking out a holy woman named Keeper Yenin, and then they learn that there is a resistance, and that it's run by Percy's childhood friend, Archie. Now, Percy was, again, a noble, and Archie was, I think, the son of the cook. So they're going to try and go and break him out of prison. And in that process, Percy meets one of the jailers, Carrion Stonefell, who's one of the people that's on his list, on his barrels of his gun. And we get to see him put the mask on and go into like full vengeance mode. The smoke is roiling off him. It's very nicely done. The effect is amazing. The mask gets pulled off. His eyes are black with like burning orange pupils. Very cool. And he kills Carrion Stonefell with the gun, and the name just off of the barrel of the gun. And I thought very, very cool. And it was, again, that was part of his goal in the campaign, was to check those names off his list by killing them using, again, the gun that he forged. I should also have said before they left on this trip, Pike left. She decided that she needed to find a way to reconnect with her god. Something happened. She was going to go to a temple, and we see in the meantime her going through the various efforts to try and reestablish her connection to the divine, as she believes Delilah has cursed her and severed that. And it is revealed when they get Archie out that their person on the inside that's been feeding them information from the Briarwoods is actually Percy's sister, Cassandra, who is not dead, but has been in the Briarwoods' clutches since Percy ran away. So now he's obviously elated that his sister is alive, but distraught that... and this is also done very well in the voice acting. And again, we kind of saw this all play out, again, once live during the campaign, but Cassandra is alive, but, he left her to die, so he's happy she's alive, but he basically left her in the clutches of the people who murdered their family for however many years that they've been there. And then this next episode, that I think is the 7th episode, deals with the party, basically splitting the party, which normally is never a good idea. The party wants to go try and rescue Cassandra, but they need a distraction, and Scanlan says, I'll go do it, I'm the best at distractions, and this actually happens in the campaign. And I really, really like how they did it here. It plays out slightly different than the campaign, but I think all the key points are there. He runs into the house and he starts trying to make noise and a distraction. In the original campaign, he used to polymorph into a Triceratops a lot. That was like a thing he would do. So in the original campaign, that's what he did. He transformed into a Triceratops and basically just like tore stuff up, called the guards all over to it. The way it happens in here is earlier he had found a scroll of polymorph in General Krieg's, like the stuff they looted from it, and he found a bunch of potions, and he doesn't know what they do, so he tries drinking a bunch of these potions, and it leads to a bunch of interesting little encounters, one of them being a fire breath potion, which he uses to set the house on fire, which interestingly enough is how he set the house on fire in the campaign. When he's in the Duke's study, he sees a Triceratops skull on the wall, and that allows him to polymorph into the Triceratops, wrecking the house. And then there's a showdown between him and the Duke on the rooftop in the rain. And he summons lightning, casts a lightning bolt from his dick, which is a Scanlan move from the original campaign. Zaps the Duke, leaps off the house onto his Scanlan's hand, giving a middle finger to the Duke. Very well done. I remember that vividly from the campaign. I thought it translated very well to the animation. Long story short, they go to try to get Cassandra, and they find Professor Anders, another person on Percy's list, who is there, who has been, who has her there, and they have to get into a fight with Professor Anders, who has a literal silver tongue and magically enchanted to use a bunch of what looks like D&D shield guardians to fight the party. They also tap into the trope of mind controlling the big barbarian person to have them fight the party. That happens. They eventually win. They rescue Cassandra, and Percy manages to check Professor Anders' name off of his list as well. But all the while, the smoke and the severity of all of this continues to grow, and we can start to see that maybe there's something more to that. But as such, having defeated him, Delilah summons all of the dead in the city to be back as undead, to just assault the townspeople, assault Vox Machina, and they're basically having a showdown in the streets at the Sun Tree with Cassandra in tow, trying to survive. But in the meantime, Pike has had a really, really awesome encounter with her god, and I very much like this. This is something I would recommend any DM watch as a means to establish sort of these divine connections with your party. She's trying to reach the Everlight, her goddess, and the goddess basically says, "Stop lying to me." And she says, "I'm not lying to you. I feel like I've lost my connection to you. What do I do?" And I'm butchering this completely, by the way. But and the Everlight says, "You're not lying to me. You're lying to yourself." And she's like, "Well, my friends are rowdy and raucous, and they curse and they drink, and they're not great people. And I feel like if I'm hanging out with them, then I can't be doing doing service to you." And basically, her god is like, "So what? Just because you want to serve me and teach my ways and use my power to do good doesn't mean you can't be who you are. So who are you, Pike Trickfoot?" And then that's a very, really good moment. I really appreciate that, and I think that could definitely be adapted to a lot of people's campaigns. And as such, she basically, when all seems lost and the party's going to lose to all of these undead, she bamfs in golden astral projection form and just starts leveling stuff with divine power. And in the campaign, that's actually kind of what happens. In real life, Ashley Johnson had to go to New York to film Blind Spot, so she couldn't offer the TV show, and she couldn't often be on the show to play, but occasionally she'd be able to Skype in to the game. And as such, Matt would have her character astrally project into the city, or into wherever the party is, and then she would kind of be in a divine avatar form and could help the party out. And they actually brought that into the campaign, or into the show rather, and I really appreciated that. That was a nice little callback. And as such, she's able to bless everybody in the town's weapons, and they start fighting back against the Briarwood's forces, and it starts to go pretty well for them overall. Then they decide they're going to make their way. Cassandra helps them sneak back into the mansion, and they're going to try and find the Briarwoods. They're in the dungeons, and they come across Dr. Anna Ripley, another person on Percy's list on his list of barrels of people he's seeking vengeance for. She was the professor under the employ of, or engineer rather, under the employ of the Briarwoods. Also someone who helped torture Cassandra and Percy. So she's actually now missing a hand, which is not a thing that had happened when he met her last. And Percy is obviously full vengeance mode, ready to end her. And the party is very getting what's going on with you, dude? This whole vengeance smoke monster thing. We might need to talk about that. And they're looking at, they basically have a moment where Pike says something's clouding your soul. It's I don't know what it is. And he's like, "I promise on my family's name I'll get this looked at, but not right now. We got to go deal with the Briarwoods." And they basically decide they're going to keep Anna Ripley alive long enough to get whatever your information is useful from her, and that's what kind of Cassandra and Percy agree to. And there's a really cool scene where it did happen relatively like this. I don't remember exactly, where they go into an area to... Whitestone is the name of the city, but it's also one of their exports. It can be refined down, I believe, or it's used as a catalyst or something for something called residuum, which is a green glass-like material that can be used to supplement for spell components in the world of Critical Role. And acid is part of the refinement process. So they're in this room where they refine the Whitestone or the residuum with this acid. And it's interesting. I really love what they did. They're all standing there trying to figure out what to do. And Percy looks at his gun, and Cassandra DeRollo, his sister's name, appears on the barrel of the gun, and he turns and looks, and she's actually betraying them, pulling a lever to lock them in the room. And it appearing on the barrel of the gun, I don't remember if it happened that way in the original campaign, but that was just beautiful. I loved that. It was such a good visual moment. Vax he slides under the thing to try to fight her, but he gets mind controlled by Silas, who shows up, and then Cassandra delivers just this horrible blow to Percy by saying, "I'm a Briarwood now. Why do I need a brother who would leave me behind to die? The Briarwoods and the Whispered One are my family now." And then basically acid starts pouring into the room, and they're shut off, so they're going to get consumed by acid. And I love the way this is handled. Percy just checks out, right? He's gone now. And I thought this was handled very well. And the party's like, "What do we do?" They look to Vex for an idea. She's like, I don't know, try to stop it. And they try to stop it, and it makes it worse. I also should have pointed out, and I meant to do it earlier, there's a running joke that doors are the worst and they hate doors. And that was a huge issue in Campaign 1 where they would just have trouble getting through. They could do all this great stuff but couldn't get through doors. And there's multiple instances of that, and they really play it up. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. Scanlan casts Scanlan's hand and basically is lifting up the entire party. Percy's still checked out, almost going to get eaten by the acid. And then basically Vex has a really touching moment with Percy. He says, we're here. We're never going to leave you. We can't survive without you, though. We need your help. And he basically his mind starts going. He figures out what's going on. They figure out there's 3 levers they need to pull. And without thinking, one of them is at the bottom of the acid pool. Grog just jumps off into the acid, swimming down through the acid, skin dissolving off, Pike healing him as he's going. Awesome scene. And they pull the levers. Everything's fine. And they continue on to their final showdown with the Briarwoods at the big ziggurat, right? And then this is where Percy's vengeance monster really starts to take over. Dr. Ripley's gonna leave, and Percy's gonna shoot her because the vengeance monster is basically controlling his hand to pull the gun up to shoot. And they're like, Percy, it'll be too loud. They'll hear. They're trying to get the surprise jump on them, figure out what their plan is gonna be. And then she escapes, and then without Percy just yells out, Silas, and goes after him. And they're like, well, I guess, that no more surprise. And I really, really like that. They've got Vax there. They've got, Cassandra there, and they need a blood sacrifice to do the final bit of what they need to do to summon the Whispered One into the world. For those of you who don't know, the Whispered One is Vecna, the famous D&D lich. But they can't use Vecna because that property, again, is owned by Wizards of the Coast. So they have to say the Whispered One. And then an epic fight scene ensues. Unfortunately, once again, this is the instance where Grog gets knocked out immediately. And again, like I said, 2 times doesn't necessarily make a trope, but it leads to the rest of the party being able to have impactful moments where Vax is fighting Vex. He's under mind control. They're fighting each other. Percy is fighting Cassandra, and he's trying. Her name's on the barrel, and the Vengeance Monster's trying to make him kill her. And I really like it. The whole fight, he's basically got his other hand on the hand with the gun, trying to keep it from shooting her. And it's just like the whole fight, he's running around with his other hand on his arm so that it doesn't errantly go and shoot someone. And I really, really like that little touch. There's a lot of little subtle animation things that they do throughout. And I forgot to mention it earlier. There's one part where he has 6 barrels on his gun, and 5 of the barrels have names on them. And Scanlan says earlier on, who's the 6th barrel for? And his shadow has the gun pointed at his own head, but that's never touched on, So I thought that was a lot of clever animation stuff they've done in the show. But basically, Keyleth is fighting Silas. She gets knocked out. Then it goes to Pike in her divine form, just having an epic, dark versus light battle. And Scanlan is trying to fight Delilah, but she eventually silences him with some sort of spell where he now can't make noise, so he's basically useless in the fight. And it goes through a bunch of different, awesome scenes of different things happening. I will say they also allude to a lot more of a lot of the romantic relationships that happen between the party members. Some of them were kind of touched on briefly in the show. A couple of them did happen, but some of them I feel like are more present here in the show than they were in the series or in the show, as opposed to the campaign, where the campaign, some of the stuff didn't happen till way, way later on. But anyway, long story short, Grog gets up, fights Silas, and basically gets him in a full Nelson. And Keyleth has recalls back to when Pike told her, "You're their light now. Be their light in the darkness." And she casts Sunbeam, which summons sunlight, which obviously is harmful to vampires. And she basically blasts a beam of sunlight, destroying Silas, which sends Delilah into a rage. And that actually all plays out pretty much like it did in the original campaign. And then Delilah goes inside the ziggurat and starts trying to do this ritual to bring the Whispered One, Vecna, into the world. The party breaks in through the door, and they can't get to her. She's got a force field. And eventually she's going to try and kill Vex with a move, and Keyleth jumps in the way, takes the hit, falls down and is essentially dying. Delilah finishes her spell and summons this like an image, an avatar, if you will, of like Vecna the Whispered One, and then he disappears, and they're left with a black spinning orb of death. Pike snaps out of existence before she can heal Keyleth. None of their healing magic is working. They're terrified. What are they going to do? They figure out that the black orb of death is absorbing all magic. They have a really touching scene where Vax remembers how Keyleth healed his wounds and basically makes a salve that heals her and saves her life. And seemingly now with basically a knocked out, beaten Delilah in tow, everything is over. But the vengeance monster in Percy takes over, and it starts to force him to want to kill her. And Keyleth basically says something along the lines of, if that monster, that demon, gets what it wants, I don't think we're going to have to worry. There's not going to be any Percy left. And again, just really well done. And I love this scene. This is the last episode, and I think it's done so well. It's all told, like the vengeance monster is basically taking over Percy's body. We can see him crying, trying to fight against this monster, not being able to do so. And it's almost all told through flashbacks from Percy's perspective. The party's actually trying to save Delilah by not letting Percy kill her. And it's all done. It's an inner turmoil where he sees all of these horrible instances of his past play out that he's seeing. He's like trying to shoot these people in the past and it doesn't work, but in reality he's actually shooting at his party members. In the actual campaign, the smoke monster manifested into like a physical form and the party fought it with like weapons. This, I thought they did a very nice job of saying like, it's up to Percy now, he needs to fight it. At a point he points the gun at himself and he's gonna like, well, I don't know what else to do, I'll just end this. And eventually he battles through and he shoots himself in the hand, basically ending the smoke monster. It's gone. That happened. I don't know if it happens that he shoots himself in the hand, but a lot of this does end up happening over the course of the campaign. And then Delilah starts pontificating about how like, oh, you still fail, blah, blah, blah. And Percy's like, you know, Delilah, you're going to stand trial. You'll basically forgives her. And Cassandra, just when she starts just right through the neck with a rapier, and really badass scene. Like, I'm glad you forgave her, brother, but I could not. Walks away, and I was like, this is nice. And then Percy goes to pick up the gun, and Scanlan says, no, I'm gonna take this. And he's like, don't worry, the demon's gone, everything's fine. And Scanlan hucks it into the acid. And it's a great scene because that plays out exactly like it did in the campaign. Percy's like, what are you doing? Do you know how much money that cost? It was enchanted. Do you know how long it's going to take me to make another one? And then we see, like, as it starts to dissolve, like, the smoke monster comes out and dissolves into the acid. And he's just like, all right, thanks. Good job. The party makes their way back into the city. Everybody's, joyous. The Briarwoods are defeated. Cassandra's going to take over. Percy has a nice bit about, like, I would not be meant to lead. They'll see you as a survivor. And I think this is another thing that does well in the terms of a D&D campaign. If the party has this, they're a noble and they can run the household, like, does that person just retire from adventuring? Or do they turn it over to somebody else? And that was handled again here where they just turn over, he turns over Rule of Whitestone to his sister, so that he can basically continue adventuring and continue playing in the campaign. They make their way back to the city where they're being congratulated by the sovereign, of the town, of the city rather, and he says Vox Machina has taught me the wisdom of a group, so I will step down from my role as kind of the sovereign and turn it over to the council, and they'll rule the city. But just as it seems like all is well, Vex once again gets that ping in her brain, the dragon ping, and we see not one, not two, but 4 dragons flying towards the city of Amon, a red dragon, a black dragon, a white dragon, and a green dragon. Basically setting up the Chroma Conclave arc, which is the next series of episodes that happen in Critical Role, which stems from episode 39 all the way to episode 83, right? That was a big chunk of the original series, was all based around these dragons. So I hope that if we do get a campaign 2, it's twice as many episodes, it's 24 episodes, and it's all focused on this. But yeah, like I said, Legends of Vox Machina, I think, is a fantastic, one of the best adaptations of Dungeons and Dragons to visual media that we've seen so far. We don't have a lot of great examples. We have the old cartoon, from the 80s, and we have the horrible movies that exist, the horrible theatrical released one, and the other two that are only okay. So, I mean, maybe we'll see some better stuff happen in the future with these new ones that are being produced by Wizards of the Coast. But, yeah, I think it's the best form. It stands alone, I think, too, as a great just animated series in and of itself if you don't know the connection to Critical Role. I would be interested to see the metrics. I don't think there's any way to find out, but the amount of people who watch this show, realize it's about Dungeons and Dragons, and then either start watching Critical Role or start playing Dungeons and Dragons as part of it. Amazon could probably figure that out. How many people watched Legend of Vox Machina versus how many people then followed up by buying D&D books on Amazon. But like I said, I think it's very well done. I think the show is great. I love the animation style. I said the pacing is very well done. I don't feel like you're ever bored at any point. You don't feel the episodes dragging on. They're so quick hit and concise. You get a lot of stuff real quick, and then it leaves you wanting more. I also have to say I really liked the release schedule, which is something I don't think I've ever seen. We either see things like Netflix, where they drop the entire series all at once, then you can binge it in one go, or something like Disney Plus, where we see an episode week to week. This was 3 episodes every Friday. And that was perfect. That's a great Friday night thing, especially if they're like 25 minutes long. You can get together. You can throw a little party if you want, a watch party of some kind, and you can watch 3 episodes of an animated series. I think that I would love to see more of that. Because, you know, I feel like when you have a full series drop, you're sort of almost pressured, especially in the world where we live in with spoilers, you're almost pressured to watch the entire series in one go. Whereas, or, you know, you're waiting week to week for the next episode. But 3 episodes at a clip, I think, was a really nice touch. But anyway, I'm curious what you think. Again, like I said, I don't normally do these kinds of reviews, and there's a lot to cover, so that's why this video is as long as it is. I hope I did it justice and got my point across and told you how I feel about it. There's a lot, again, like I said, a lot of nostalgic moments for me to see them play out in form where I got to hear them play out and watch them play out with like little minis on a map. But to get to see them in a fully animated form is really awesome. I just wish there was a way for more of us to be able to animate our own campaigns. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.